This time on Poll Hub, our first poll of 2025 has taken the pulse of America as we enter the era of Trump 2. There's a lot to discuss here, but it does seem like one thing is clear from our results. Trump is unlikely to get much of a public opinion honeymoon this time around. Then, there's been a lot of medical research over the last few years showing alcohol to be far more dangerous than we were led over centuries to believe. Is that why people, especially young people, are drinking less? We're going to discuss. And we finish with America's favorite European holiday destination in 1937. This one's fun. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffith.
I'm Hunter Petro.
And I am Lee Marinoff.
Well, happy episode before a long holiday weekend, everyone. This year, we not only honor Dr. King's legacy on Monday, but we also welcome back Donald Trump to the White House. And along with our national polling partners, NPR and PBS News, we took a look ahead at the Trump agenda, took a look at some of the issues, some of the plans and proposals that Mr. Trump has on his docket as he begins his second administration. And among them was the question of whether or not Americans support mass deportations of undocumented immigrants. Let's start there. And what we found is that Americans divided 49% who strongly support these deportations and 49% who strongly oppose these mass deportations. And Republicans were among those driving the support for deportation. So Lee, before we get into any more numbers, why don't you jump in and talk to us about what this means for the Trump administration?
Well, and I thought it was very interesting because obviously that's of the pillar plans that he has put forward. That's certainly one that's major. And I think that the fact that it plays to a mixed review before the event will occur, or the events, I think should raise a cautionary flag. And I think it gets to a point that we'll talk about, just what is a mandate and, is this one? But I think what I'm seeing is that, although that's probably his strongest of the several proposals that he's advancing or will advance, I'm seeing, that there's some concern within even the Republican leadership. I thought it was interesting that Newt Gingrich sent out a warning shot that said basically, if you go ahead with this, this is going to be nothing but trouble. And I think part of it has to do with the economic fall off. And I mean, even think about what's going on in California and the people who are going to be needed to rebuild, and I think that may be an issue on the economy where this proposal, if enacted, and it's unclear the extent that he actually will do it, probably not to the size that he's been talking about.
Lee, you bring up the economy, and that's one issue that we might as well just jump into right now. Americans have high economic hopes for President Trump and the economy. 59%, up from 29% in February of 2020, say that the economy is not working well for them right now. And yet a plurality of Americans, 44%, including 63% of Republicans, think their family finances will improve in the upcoming year. Is this a tall task for Trump as he heads into the White House, Barb?
Well, I think one of the things that Americans voted for in November was they, again, wanted change. I mean, we've seen that in really election cycle after election cycle. It's nothing new, but I think that there certainly, and this data points to the struggle and concern that Americans have overall about the inflation period that we did go through over the last couple of years and the remnants of that, where prices go up, but they rarely, if ever, go down. I think President Trump has certainly, modified his position on that, saying that very thing. But there is that optimism, the new administration. And I think we see, although we see polarization on a number of the questions and proposals that I think Donald Trump will propose going forward, there is a consensus on many of these issues. There's a consensus on immigration, that this needs to be a problem that is solved. Perhaps there isn't a consensus in terms of President-elect Trump's main proposal, but there is energy and interest among Americans to solve that issue. And I think there's an optimism that we need to change the page on the economy. I don't think there's a consensus about how that happens, but we do see that Americans are optimistic looking forward to the new year and to the new administration. And so Trump has a narrow majority in Congress. I think that there is certainly no strong consensus in Congress. I mean, I think some of the issues that have been debated over the last month or so during the transition has shown that there are Republicans who have other ideas about policy too, particularly with regard to the deficit. So I don't know that we're going to be solving the issue of gridlock in Washington, but Americans certainly are optimistic. Those important issues will at least be placed on the agenda.
Mary, if I could just jump in and say, I think this is all about, and Barb alluded to this with Trump saying, well, food prices go up a lot, but they're really tough to get down. And I think it's, this along with other things, there seems to be a resetting of expectations. So when you say that people are concerned about the economy, but they think it's going to really turn around, that's good for getting elected, but not necessarily good once you're in governing office, and whether he's going to be able to convince people that you're really doing better than you think you are. Because if there are in either inflation or unemployment, and it ties back obviously to some of the deportation issues and what might be some economic fall off from that. Resetting expectations, Elon Musk, well, maybe that $2 trillion cutback, we're just not going to get there. Or even Vance talking about, I know we have numbers on the pardon, but maybe if you did criminal things, you can be pardoned, but I'm not sure everybody else should get a pardon. So, there seems to be a pre-inaugural resetting of expectations.
We also asked about the tariffs or fees that may be placed on products imported from other countries. We found that 48% of Americans generally think that is going to hurt the national economy. 31%, driven mostly by Republicans, believe that it's going to help the economy. But tariffs is a really complicated issue. And, there is certainly no consensus among Americans. Do you think there's more of a consensus in Washington about them, or is this also going to be something that we're going to watch debated even among Republicans?
Well, I think it comes back to the idea of whether or not it hits Americans personally. I think that tariffs are not necessarily something that a lot of people tend to engage in that discussion. But I think that if Americans see that there are proposals on the table, there's action being taken in Washington, and that they're not feeling that their economic position is getting better, I think that is definitely something that will be discussed and get a lot more attention. But Lee, you did mention the word pardon, and we asked Americans about their views on whether or not they approve or disapprove of Donald Trump pardoning those who were involved in the attacks on the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. And what we found is that while Americans divide about the immigration policy that Donald Trump is setting forth, or part of the immigration policy that Trump is setting forth, 62% of Americans disapprove of Trump pardoning those who were involved in the January 6th attacks on the Capitol. And that includes 30% of Republicans. Did this surprise you, Barb, Lee?
I'll say that the whole thing about January 6th has become such a redefinition of what occurred. And the fact that there are that many people who would oppose the pardons when there's been so much information put forth on the Trump side that this, was people should believe him and not their own eyes. And that's been what their position has been. And I just think people are drawing the line in the sand on that one because of what I think they saw.
Yeah, and the consensus is really built upon, Democrats and even 62% of independents. And as you mentioned, nearly 3 in 10 Republicans. And so I think it depends upon, certainly Trump promised to do this. It was a rallying cry for his supporters. It depends upon how much political capital, he
Yeah.
wants to use on this issue. I think that the past is any indication of some of the things that he may do. He's incredibly supportive of those people who stand with him and stand behind him. So I think that to not do this will certainly, I think, be something that costs him, at least mildly among his supporters.
He could have done this at the end of, the first term, and he did not. So I think that's interesting, and I alluded initially, and I think if you drew a circle around everything we're talking about, all the things we told about, the question is, just how strong a mandate does Donald Trump have? And although he's claiming a very large one in the popular vote, this one, the difference is 1.5% advantage for him. And that gets back, the ones that there are only a few in the last 100 years that were closer than the one Trump, John F. Kennedy in
Yeah, but
19.
mandates are defined by the people who are in power. And so I think that's a subjective and, distracting debate because basically he is going to be taking office. Vice President Vance did kind of throw out a trial balloon about whether some people should be pardoned and some people shouldn't. And I really do think it was a trial balloon. I don't think he was out there completely on his own. But that may be some of the things that they're debating and discussing about whether this is a full pardon for everyone who was involved or whether there's going to be, some kind of cherry picking along those tracks. So I think that, I mean, my feeling is that at least some pardons are going to be
Yes,
moving
some.
forward. And, certainly we'll see how much political capital he wants to use on
So
that
are we
issue.
going to see a honeymoon with Donald Trump or not?
I think right now we are.
I wanted to just quickly mention, we did ask about Joe Biden. His final approval rating in his time in office is at 42%, little changed from what we've been experiencing. But just very quickly, Barb, how will Biden be remembered in comparison with other presidents?
It's interesting because he came into office as a transition president, and I think the office does change some people, and he goes out certainly in this time period as a president who does not, have the approval of half of Americans, with many more Americans disapproving of the job that he has done, and not thinking that he will be remembered highly. But I think that there were a number of accomplishments in his administration that history will be kinder to than the present.
Well, this month not only features New Year's, Martin Luther King Day, and the inauguration, it is also Dry January, something that didn't really exist a decade ago. And there's plenty of evidence this is a trend that is expanding well outside its post-holiday cold winter boundaries.
Yeah, in recent years, Americans seem to be rethinking their relationship with alcohol. And this is particularly true among younger people. They're drinking far less than their counterparts did 20 or 30 years ago, when I was a young person. And some are even choosing to abstain completely. So we wanted to know what's going on.
Let's start with some of the numbers. Gallup has been tracking Americans' views on health effects of moderate drinking for over 2 decades. In their most recent consumption habits poll, which was conducted in July 2024, they found that 45% of Americans now say drinking 1 or 2 alcoholic beverages per day is bad for one's health.
And that's the highest percentage Gallup has ever recorded. It's also a 6-point increase just since last year, a 17 percentage point increase since 2018. They also reported that 55% of Americans believe reducing the average intake of alcohol is the best thing that an average drinker can do. 22% of people think people should stop drinking altogether.
Yeah, it's quite a drastic change from how Americans viewed alcohol just a few years ago. Between 2001 and 2018, Gallup found that most Americans didn't believe moderate drinking really affected their health.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago that media reported on studies suggesting that drinking, a glass of red wine might have health benefits. My late mother, well into her 90s, insisted she needed her 4 ounces, and it was only 4 ounces, but her 4 ounces of red wine every night because it was good for her. And she lived to 94, so who's going to argue with her? But even with all of those reports at that time, even then, that same Gallup poll found that no more than 25%, a quarter of Americans, ever said they thought drinking was actually good for one's health.
So let's get back to now. The group driving this new shift away from drinking is young adults. According to Gallup, 65% of adults between the ages of 18 and 34 now say that alcohol consumption negatively affects one's health. That's a whopping 31 percentage points from 2018, when it was just 34%.
And it's not just young adults. Teenagers are also drinking less. The 2024 University of Michigan Monitoring the Future survey, which is a really long-term survey. They've been talking to high school kids and junior high school kids for a really long time. They found that 42% of 12th graders said they had consumed alcohol in the past year, in 2024, compared to 26% of 10th graders and 13% of 8th graders. So here's what to pay attention to here. The numbers from 2001 were 73% of 12th graders. Remember, it's 42% this year. 64% of 10th graders and 42% of 8th graders in 2001 reported that they had drank alcohol in the prior year.
It's a remarkable decline. And if we're talking about generational trends, here's a fun one. A Tinder survey from last year found that 39% of people on the app are now looking for sober dates.
I will not ask you to share your Tinder profile in this case. That's interesting, though. So let's take a peek behind the curtain at the factors driving this trend. There's been a flood of new research in recent years highlighting the potential negative effects of any alcohol consumption, even in moderation. And this research does seem to be reshaping public opinion.
For decades, alcohol has been classified as a Group 1 carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. This is the highest risk group, which also includes items like asbestos, tobacco, and radiation. In fact, in December of 2022, the World Health Organization declared that there was no level of alcohol consumption that was considered safe for our health, and discussed the latest data that indicated half of all alcohol attributable cancers in the WHO European region are caused by light and moderate consumption.
Yeah, hard data there, and there's more hard data about alcohol's impacts. In June 2024, the World Health Organization, released a report highlighting that there were, in their estimate, 2.6 million deaths per year around the world that are attributable to alcohol consumption. That accounts for almost 5% of all deaths, which means that 1 in every 20 deaths in the world, according to WHO, is attributable to alcohol consumption.
And among Americans, the number of deaths caused by alcohol-related diseases doubled between 1999 and 2020, according to a study published in the American Journal of Medicine in November 2024. Alcohol was involved in nearly 50,000 deaths among adults ages 25 to 85 in 2020, up from just under 20,000 in 1999.
So at the same time, we're talking about alcohol, but there's also been this sea change in another thing that gets people, through the day. At the same time that alcohol usage has declined among the younger Americans, marijuana usage has increased. And this isn't a surprise, given that it has become broadly legal in most states recently. According to an August 2023 Gallup survey, marijuana use among adults 18 to 34 has nearly doubled since 2013. Again, this is a period where it's become broadly legal. That's a 11-point rise to 25% between 2021 and 2023. So 25% of adults 18 to 34 saying that they have used marijuana.
We actually took a deep dive into that trend in Poll Hub episode 358. If you're interested, you should check it out. Meanwhile, the alcohol industry is not ignoring these changes. The market for non-alcoholic beverages is booming.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that everywhere from the supermarket to restaurants and bars. In fact, the U.S. non-alcoholic beverage market, the NA market, was valued at about $150 billion in 2022. It's projected to grow to more than $225 billion by 2023. That's according to the IWSR Drinks Market Analysis. And that analysis in 2023 showed that non-alcoholic beverages saw their overall volumes increase by 29% compared to 2022, while low alcohol options grew by 7%. So this is a fast-growing market.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, mocktails and NA bars are one of the hottest trends in big cities. It's rare to see a drinks menu in most New York City restaurants now that don't have at least one, and often many, non-alcoholic options, whether it's an NA beer or a proper fancy mocktail.
Yeah, that's true. It's a trend, and you see it not only in those places, but in the coverage of it in lifestyle blogs and mags and TikTok and Instagram. I have a question, though. So I'm a lot older than you are. You're in this young adult group where there's been this dramatic decline. I went back and looked at the numbers from that University of Michigan survey. In the year I graduated high school, I know you're a couple of years out of high school, but I graduated high school, and in that year, 88% of my peers in this survey had alcohol in the last year, and 77% had it in the prior month. Those numbers are less than half now. What do you think your generation's relationship is to alcohol that is different than mine?
I think we're a lot more aware now because of the tools at our disposal, like social media, like iPhones and stuff. We have a lot more of an ability to go ahead and do our own research, and not even do our own research. If you're just scrolling on TikTok, sometimes that research will come to you, as we've talked about in previous episodes. And TikTok and Instagram and those social media platforms are filled with wellness influencers and not just that, but educational posts that really sort of discuss, it's either, could be sober, curious people or people telling their story, but stories that really open people's eyes. I mean, we talked about the effects of alcohol, and we talked about how the WHO has sort of talked about it as can't be healthy in any sort of situation. And I think that we're looking at a generation that's really able to do their own research on a situation, and they're worried. I think they're worried. But I will also say that there is another factor at hand here pretty consistently, and that would be the rise of marijuana, as we talked about and we have talked about in the past. I mean, you even see industries making CBD and THC drinks now and, putting those up for availability. And I'd be interested to see what the numbers on those are looking like. But I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see how our generation continues to grow its relationship with alcohol as we hit 21, if that changes anything. But I don't know if it will.
Yeah, I mean, so the drinking age was 18 when I graduated high school. It was in Connecticut. It was different in different parts of the country. It hadn't dropped. It had gone up to 21, and it went up to 21 not long after that. So that is a difference. I agree with you that there's a big difference in when the age is allowed. But I mean, college campuses, it's no mystery that kids under 21 on a college campus may drink, right? But is that like, you're on a college campus? Are there parties where you go to and like half the people don't drink? Is that actually a real thing?
I will say that there are a good number of people who will go out on the weekends, and we're at Marist, so there's not a lot of parties at Marist, but people go out on the weekends and they'll spend their nights out at, local bars or local restaurants, and they don't drink. They don't need to drink. They don't feel the urge to drink. They'll go and they'll dance with their friends to good music. And my roommate is a great example of it. She hates drinking. She doesn't like the idea of it. She loves going out. She loves having a great time with her friends. Doesn't need to drink. Doesn't feel the urge to do so, and can have an even better time. I mean, I've talked to so many people who have the same kind of story where they just feel like it sort of brings them down, and they have a lot more fun on a sober event, where they're just being themselves. So I don't know. I think it changes person by person, but it's going to be very interesting because there are a large number of people who are very okay with just being sober now.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's also the kind of the really quick kind of almost whiplash. Drinking increased during the pandemic, at least, among the general population. There's all kinds of reasons you can say why that would make sense, or sitting at home and yada, yada, yada. And we've looked at that data, but this seems to be almost the whiplash effect here. It has dropped from prior to the pandemic. The numbers have dropped even faster. And I'm just wondering if maybe some of the experience in the pandemic was, sitting at home on my third drink. It's like, I'm done with this. I wonder if there was some of that, if the pandemic actually had some of that impact.
Yeah, I feel like the best way that you ever find out if something is healthy or unhealthy for you is, unfortunately, by overconsumption. And, you sit there and you drink every day. You will feel it yourself. You don't need to go to a hospital. You don't need to have a doctor tell you that it's unhealthy. Your body will start to reject it eventually. So it's something that maybe a lot of people were, testing the waters, and they sort of got their own results back on a scientific study. But I don't know. The whole thing has been very interesting. I mean, I wonder what this means for the alcohol industry going forward. I mean, do you think that we're going to see these multi-billion-dollar companies pivoting towards non-alcoholic and low-alcohol options?
Right. Well, they already are. I mean, if you look at the way that companies have shifted to like hard seltzers, now that's still alcohol, but the tastes away from wine and beer, the traditional, and then hard spirits, I mean, there's empirical data about this, right? There's sales data, and that's been declining. The whole microbrew boom has kind of begun to fade because the audience is not as much there for it as it was in the past. And so the alcohol industry has done things like, really ramp up the spiked seltzer, the hard seltzer thing. But at the same time, the NA options, I mean, there are full NA liquor stores, or NA stores. They're not liquor stores, right? No, I don't go out all the time. I don't go to restaurants all the time. But I mean, even in clubs, even at concerts, you're going to a concert at a concert venue, there are lots of NA options, at the stands now. And that didn't exist 5, 6, 8 years ago. Not at all. And so I think that the industry any industry wants to preserve itself, right? So I think they recognize if we're going to survive this, we need to be in other things. It's interesting you mentioned THC beverages too. There are bars that have THC drinks in some places now too. So that's a different way of, getting intoxicated without alcohol in a bar setting. So I think, yeah, a lot of moving pieces here.
All right, so we turn to fun fact time, and I must say I am enjoying this fun fact for a variety of reasons, not the least of which I'd like fun facts, dare I say, that are almost a century old. This one goes back to 1937 when Gallup asked, "What is your favorite European country?" And I just thought that the answers were interesting. The time period of the questions were interesting. And I think the experiences of people in this podcast will be interesting as well. So one of my favorite countries that I'm not going to at the moment would be Russia, because there's a cultural dance group I'd love to see. But I also think, my grandparents came from that area, and it's be kind of like ironic to now fly back after it took them 3 weeks to get here. But Hunter, what do Americans say, or did they say in 1937?
Yeah, in 1937, 55% of Americans said that England was the European country they liked best. 11% said France, 8% said Germany, 4% said Finland, 4% said Ireland, 3% said Italy, 3% said Switzerland, 2% said Belgium, 2% said Norway, 2% said Sweden, and then Denmark, Greece, Holland, and Russia are all at 1%. And then 2% is others.
Okay, now of the folks in the panel who are of, I would not say my generation, but the closer, Jay, you have traveled a lot in your life. Now, our friend Steve Thoma, the executive director of Washington Correspondents Association, has been, because of his work covering presidents and also being on advanced trips, he's done 65 countries. I bet he tops you, but you got a lot of, I bet you check a lot on this list. So let's hear.
I do. It's what's interesting to me is that in 1937, where Americans would want to go on vacation, or go to Europe and visit, that required getting on a ship and crossing the Atlantic. And so it was a much different idea. And so I understand England. I understand England because being so popular because, we're English speaking and yada, yada, yada. But also, most of the ship traffic went to Southampton from the U.S. Obviously, the French lines went to Le Havre, and there were other ships in other ports, but the bulk of traffic went to Southampton. So I thought that was really interesting that countries that are very popular now, like Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, south of France, are barely on the list. So I thought that was interesting. And then I also looked at, I dug up the most recent stats on where Americans go to visit in their vacations, and Southern Europe. So Italy, Spain, South France, all that is a plurality. It's not a majority, but it's a plurality of where people go. So times have changed, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you can get on a plane and fly to any of these countries pretty much nonstop from a bunch of different cities in the U.S. And in 1937, it was a journey to get there.
Although now you hear people say, "Wow, it took me 8 hours to get there by plane." Gosh, that was incredible.
Yeah, some first world problems, yeah.
So what would be on the top of your list? I mean, I thought it was interesting that, again, as you point out, I think the ability to travel and certainly the mode of conveyance did not really allow people to go places that were as far away as what we can do today. But what would be the top of your list?
So the top of my list of places I haven't been, top of the list of places you have been, I like all kinds of places in Europe. I have not been to Croatia on the Adriatic, and I would like to, that's a place I'd like to go.
All right, well, student producer Hunter, you are probably the most traveled younger person, so on the other age scale. So how many countries have you been to? And
So
on this list.
On this list, I've been to all of them except Norway and Sweden and Denmark, but I have a trip to Denmark booked in March. So I will be getting that.
Frequent flyer miles? I mean, you must
Too many. I have like 350,000 miles that are at my disposal for usage. I just don't like using them. I just would rather use cash and rank up my miles. But I will say that it's great. I love it. I love the traveling. But on this list, I'm going to end up picking a country that my favorite European country is one that was not established in 1937. Unfortunately, Malta didn't come into the EU until 1974, around there. So I'm gonna have to leave that one in the dark and say Italy, I guess, since we're talking 1937. Although I do feel like I'm cheating on Ireland by saying so.
Okay, well, Mary, that's a good segue into Mary. So, Mary, of the countries on the list, where would you like to go most if you had the opportunity?
I'm boring. I've only been to England, Italy, and France. But so yeah, Ireland is high up there, Hunter. So I'll need to talk to you about some places to go. I'm pretty sure some of your areas of interest cross over with my areas of interest. So
Okay, and Barb,
Well, as a,
when your bags are packed, where are you going to?
well, I don't do an awful lot of traveling of late, but certainly as a kid and a young adult, I had family in Portugal. So as a youth, we would go to Portugal to visit my grandparents for a good amount of time and then always wandered around. The train system there, even those decades ago, was quite wonderful and a mode of getting around that made it a wonderful summer holiday. I think probably the places on the list, one is still Portugal, because I do have relatives there that I haven't seen. And my mom was from the Madeira Islands. So I have never been there, mostly because when we did go, my mom was not particularly fond of water or heights, of which the Madeira Islands have both. So we never ventured that way. So probably that. And then because of the ponies that I do enjoy at home, the Icelandic horses, I think Iceland is probably on my list of places to go trekking, probably around the fall when they bring the horses, out for the winter and allow tourists like me to trek out to bring the hundreds of ponies out to the broad landscape for the winter.
Well, Hunter, I will give you the last word. At Marist, more than 50% of the students go abroad when I was a student, a trip for me was like, I was in Worcester for 4 years and I didn't go to Boston until my senior year when my roommate tossed me in the car. I had no idea it was 40 minutes away. So I was far less mobile. The idea of going abroad is just totally.
There's even a train
foreign
from
to me.
Worcester to Boston, Lee.
Have you
There's even
been
a train?
Lee, wait a second. Have you been to Europe?
No, I can't say that I have.
Oh, my.
My foreign country list includes, and it's only Canada. So,
Okay, I thought you were going to say like New Jersey or something.
I used to joke that my family went out west from New York and they resettled in Passaic, New Jersey, which was exactly the Hunter. What is it about the college students? And as I say, you get the last word, that, this mobility, and like you are so well traveled. Yeah. What is it? I mean,
I think we really understand what a once in a lifetime experience studying abroad is and the opportunities that you get while you're out there. And obviously here at Marist, it's really drilled into our heads. Studying abroad is a great thing. They make it one of the big key pillars of admissions and of just being a student here. And we all become very aware of how beneficial it could be. But not only that, we talk to each other. And when you hear that you can get a flight from Ireland to Greece for $25, it's pretty tempting for the people that love traveling already. And when you hear that you can drink at 18, it's pretty tempting for the other hand of college students.
Although based on our prior segment, maybe fewer college students than in the past,
Maybe,
right?
Yeah, very true.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Hunter Petro and Neil Viswanathan.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review.
Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Marist Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub.
And with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.